President Trump takes his affordability tour to Detroit. Leaders in Minnesota are fighting back against the federal government with a kind of crazy new lawsuit. We're unpacking a huge day at the Supreme Court. There is so much news that it is a special Wednesday episode of 10 Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
President Trump is taking his affordability tour to Detroit.
Now, after less than 12 months in office, I'm back in Michigan to report to you on the strongest and fastest economic turnaround in our country's history. It's really been historic.
He also made some jokes.
You are so lucky I allow you into this room to even be with me. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. The fake news will say Donald Trump thinks he's hot stuff.
This speech comes as President Trump once again gets very positive economic news.
On consumer price index, we're expecting a headline number up 0.3%, and it delivered. That's exactly what we received, up 0.3%.
I'm very optimistic. More new highs, good GDP, closed southern border.
Joe, I'm with you on all those positives. I'm not disputing any of those, and the inflation number is one more reason to be optimistic.
If you like what you're hearing on the 10 Minute Drill, please leave us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. As Minnesota faces a major crackdown on illegal immigration and their sanctuary policies and their exorbitant $9 billion fraud, Minnesota officials are pushing back against the federal government.
We asked the courts to end the DHS unlawful behavior in our state. The intimidation, the threats, the violence, the deployment of thousands of armed, mass DHS agents to Minnesota has done our state serious harm. This is, in essence, a federal invasion of the Twin Cities and Minnesota.
Here's what the state of Minnesota is arguing in this lawsuit. They argue ICE is using force against individuals peacefully engaging in constitutionally protected speech. They argue ICE is arresting, threatening, and using force against innocent bystanders. And they argue that ICE is carrying out enforcement actions at sensitive locations like schools, churches, and hospitals. Now, first on that First Amendment issue, yesterday we spent a lot of time going into Minnesota ICE Watch, the training materials of these groups that is encouraging people not to simply peacefully protest or be bystanders, as this lawsuit alleges. These people are trained to go in and violently confront ICE agents to, quote, de-arrest people that ICE is arresting. So they are not bystanders. They're not having their First Amendment rights trampled because you do not have a First Amendment right to violently confront law enforcement agents. And on the issue of carrying out operations at sensitive locations and the type of surge tactics that we're seeing, the only reason that that's happening is because of the sanctuary policies. If you look at a red state, they're still having a large number of removing dangerous criminal illegal immigrants, but it's because local police and local government officials are working with ICE to make it less dangerous, both for the ICE agents, but also for everyone around. But because of Minnesota's sanctuary policies, ICE has to use more aggressive tactics to get in, raid, and even pull people out of sensitive places where the state is hiding them. It's not a very good lawsuit, and even CNN pundits are having to shoot it down.
I've read both the Minnesota and Illinois lawsuits. They're really political diatribes masquerading as lawsuits.
So when you hear legal experts point out how bad a lawsuit is, it's important to remember who's behind it. Keith Ellison, the main character in the entire fraud investigation, who also is involved in all sorts of crazy, loony left-wing crusades. But another point that I wanted to make here is Minnesota, and everything we've learned the last few months about Minnesota with the fraud scandal and everything else, makes an incredibly important case for our immigration system and the role of ICE. Look at the number of Somalians who are requiring welfare assistance. 81% of Somali immigrant households are on some kind of welfare. And when you look at Somali households with children, it's even more. 89% of Somali immigrant households with children are on some kind of welfare in the state. Because of Minnesota's sanctuary policies, the state is a magnet for illegal immigration, particularly among illegal immigrants with low earning power. And because of the way these communities are built in Minnesota, there's very little assimilation. There's very little English language learning, which means that people have low opportunity to earn more money, contribute, and get off of these important welfare benefits. And one reason this is all very important is Minnesota, on one hand, wants to say, we don't want federal immigration enforcement. We don't want federal immigration laws to be enforced, but we do want federal aid in all of these welfare programs that our immigrant communities are relying so heavily on, and in many cases, illegal immigrants relying heavily on, taking away those important resources from legal American citizens. Yesterday was a huge day in the United States Supreme Court as justices heard oral arguments in two major cases dealing with protecting women's sports. Here's Riley Gaines speaking on this issue outside the Supreme Court.
What myself, what my teammates, what girls around the country continue to face at the hands of I hate to make it partisan in this way, but Democratic elected officials and institutions who continue to push along that agenda, it is not inclusive. It is exclusive to the very girls, the very female athletes who the women's sporting category was created to protect and to honor.
Now, what was at issue here is whether states have the right to protect women's sports from transgender athletes. And one interesting admission came from Justice Kagan, who said these laws are legitimate.
You wouldn't think that because we are talking about an as-applied challenge to a law that's facially everybody can see is legitimate.
And of course, Ketanji Brown Jackson revealing once again that after all the hubbub during her confirmation, she still can't say what a woman is.
That this is really just about the definition of who we accept that you can separate boys and girls, and we are now looking at the definition of a girl.
Now, she can't describe what a woman is, but I would love to hear her explain what a cisgender is.
For cisgender girls,
all I know is I'm transgender, and you can't make me go to the bathroom with the cisgenders. With the what?
Late in December, California Democrats began discussing a possible billionaire tax, or, to put it more accurately, a 5% wealth confiscation for California billionaires. And to make it extra punitive, in this proposal they discussed, they included a January 1st active date because they knew that once they started talking about this policy, billionaires would flee the state immediately, and they wanted to be able to try and continue to confiscate their wealth even after they may have left the state. This has caused quite a fury. California loses mind-boggling $1 trillion in wealth in past month alone over fears of billionaire tax. Chamath from the All In podcast tweeted this: unfortunate update as of today. More calls from friends. The total wealth that has left California is now $1 trillion. We had $2 trillion of billionaire wealth just a few weeks ago. Now 50% of that wealth has left, taking their income tax revenue, sales tax revenue, real estate tax revenue, and all their staffs and their salaries and income taxes with them. Now, some of you might not feel a ton of sympathy for California liberal billionaires who voted in the terrible people who are now trying to, in a very, very communist, seize the means of production kind of way, confiscate their wealth. But it is important to note that the consequences that Chamath is talking about there are very dire. When you have this many billionaires leave, eventually, like Elon Musk, they take their headquarters with them. And Gavin Newsom will have a lot fewer things to brag about when he tries to take credit for things in the state that he had nothing to do with. Now, California does not have a revenue problem. They have a spending problem, and even more accurately, they have a spending on fraud problem. One more time. This is the state that spent $24 billion to fight homelessness under Gavin Newsom and lost it while homelessness went up. They spent $18 billion on high-speed rail without laying a single track. They spent $32 billion in COVID relief that was stolen, billions in SNAP fraud. So again, they don't have a revenue problem, they have a spending on fraud problem. And Gavin Newsom wants to run for president while trying to explain that he has been such a poor steward of California's state tax revenue. But also, these Democrats all over California are chasing out their entire tax base. This is a bit of a fraud-heavy episode, but here are some comments that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made just this week on the amount of taxpayer dollars that go to fraud in the United States.
The GAO, the General Accounting Office, believes that there is somewhere between $300 and $600 billion of annual fraud, roughly 10% of government spending, that disappears due to fraud.
But we've also talked about how Treasury is getting involved in the investigation into the $9 billion Minnesota fraud scandal, and particularly the role of Keith Ellison. And here is Treasury Secretary Bessent talking specifically about Ellison.
That's part of following the money. There are evidently some disturbing tapes of AG Ellison in meetings with people who donated to him, them calling for political favors to stop the investigations. And Chris, I can guarantee you, when the bear trap snaps, we're going to get these folks.
Now, we've talked extensively about that leaked recording and about the fact that Keith Ellison carried out a very explicit quid pro quo and then accepted donations from the later convicted fraudsters. Keith Ellison, I believe, is going to be the most important main character in these investigations going forward. Even as Ilhan Omar, Tim Waltz, and many others are implicated in different ways, Keith Ellison was the person in charge of the nonprofit universe of Minnesota, and yet we have clear evidence of him colluding to stop any investigations into it. For our You Can't Make It Up segment today, we have a little bit from Axios. The world's great climate collapse. The climate agenda's fall from grace over the past year has been stunning in speed, scale, and scope. By the numbers, global venture capital investment in climate and clean tech have dropped nearly 50% since their high of 2021. Now, what this highlights here is there's no longer a great appetite to invest in green technology, in part because the only reason that ever blew up in 2021 was the federal government put so much money into those industries through tax subsidies and tax giveaways. They turned a lot of Democrat donors into very wealthy billionaires in a short time. But there was no sustainment and there was no long-term tail because as soon as the federal subsidies for that were ended, the interest and investment dropped off. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on 10 Minute Drill on this special Wednesday episode. We will see you again tomorrow.